Hi everyone, welcome to a lesson on inference of purpose. Now, how do you know what is an inference of purpose, or whether or not the question is an inference of purpose question? I think it's very straightforward. The moment you see the word why in a question, like why do you think the writer made the comment? Why was the cartoon published? Why do you think the artist drew this cartoon? The moment you see the word why in your question, immediately you should know that okay, this is an inference of purpose question. Then this is how I answer an inference of purpose question. So the acronym that I would want you to remember is VAMCFO, or if you cannot remember that, just think about very angry mother cooking for others. Now, I know it's very similar to inference of message, where it's very angry mother cooking, but you will realize the main difference between inference of message and inference of purpose. Alright, so what is very angry mother cooking for others? V is essentially verb. You will need to ask yourself, what is the source trying to do? So this is where you'll need a standard word bank, like, is the source trying to persuade? Is the source trying to convince or to criticize or to compliment, educate? Just have some word bank ready so that you don't need to think too much of what verb to use. You can just choose based on whatever word bank or whatever motive word that you already have. Then, A is for audience. Ask yourself, who is the target audience? Is it Singaporeans, international community? Always check the provenance to see who the speaker is, where, and when did the person make the speech or publish the source in order to find out the target audience. M is for message, where you have to ask yourself what's the main message or main inference that you're supposed to get from the source. Followed by evidence and explanation, because in every claims that you're making about a source, you need to back it up with justification, and this is where your evidence from the source is supposed to come in. Then you need context, where you need to take a look at when is the source published, what is happening when the source was created, what is the background story, what is the historical context. Now, for the context part, it's only applicable for history because we already learned historical content related to the source, so you need to weave in your historical knowledge when you're writing out your answer. Then you need your feelings. What kind of feelings is this source supposed to evoke in the audience who reads the source? And then outcome. What kind of action will people take? So the idea is after you read the source, after you react and have a certain feeling about the source, what are you supposed to do next specifically? But at this point, don't get confused between message and purpose. A lot of my students always get confused between inference of message and purpose, and these are the difference. For inference of message, you only have verb, audience, message, and context for history. While for inference of purpose, you have the same acronyms or same elements of inference of message, but the additional thing is that you have feelings and outcomes. So essentially what I always say to students is that for inference of message, we're essentially asking you, what is the source trying to say here? What is the main point that the source wants to push out to you? For the inference of purpose, is essentially a case of after the target audience understand and process what is the main point that the source is trying to say, what are you supposed to do next? What is the behavioral action that they're supposed to do? So that is the main message of inference. That's the main difference between inference of message and purpose. Inference of message is what do you understand is what kind of main message is the source trying to do or trying to push out? What do you understand from it? Inference of purpose is after you understand this source, what are you supposed to do next? So that is the main difference. Okay, so let's practice inference of purpose with a history source. For this class or for this online class, I'll be using a source from lower sec history. So this is a Japanese poster circulated in Singapore during the Japanese occupation in 1942. The question is, why was the cartoon published? Okay, so let's use that source and practice answering inference of purpose using this structure here. Okay, so as usual for the verb, I always tell students to leave a space first. We will revisit this later. We'll do our audience and message because it's easier. Once you have an audience and message out, it's usually slightly easier to think of an appropriate verb. Okay, so audience, look at the provenance. Who is it targeted to? You see that this provenance states that it's circulated in Singapore. It's during the Japanese occupation. It's during 1942. So the audience here is obviously Singaporeans or people living in Singapore at this point of time or during the Japanese occupation. Then take a look at the message. The message is where you look at the details in the source. If you look at the source, you see smiling faces, you see different groups of children. Even on the clothes, you see Asian flags as well. So you see happy children plus Japanese occupation, or happy Asian children, or happy children representing the Asian countries. Combine all these details together, you will be able to say that, okay, I guess the message is that Japan would lead and guide the Asians in Asia to a better life. So the audience is that it's Singaporeans or people living in Singapore, and the message is that Japan would lead and guide the Asians in Asia to a better life. Now you can kind of think of what is the appropriate strong verb. So this is where you can kind of ask yourself, okay, imagine you're a new ruler to an area. You're pushing a very strong message that, oh, Asians will be very happy under your rule. Asians will be very happy because of you. So what will you do to get this message across? I would say that the appropriate strong verb here is to convince. So at this point here, the verb is to convince. The message, the source is trying to convince Singaporeans living in, people living in Singapore or Singaporeans that the Japanese would lead and guide Asians in Asia to a better life. Next, you need to talk about the context. Ask yourself what is happening in this point of time, what is going on behind the scenes. You would realize that I have bolded during the Japanese occupation in 1942 in red. So you would be able to say that, okay, this poster was published during the time when Japan had just invaded Singapore in 1942. They were ruling Singapore as part of its empire in Asia, the Greater East Asia Cross-Prosperity Sphere. All of those information should be in your context. You don't necessarily need to write an essay out of it. Just succinctly tell me what is the background story behind this source. So, feeling. What do you think Singaporeans are supposed to feel after they see this source? And after they have this feeling, what are they supposed to do next? Specific action. I always tell my students, how do I know that my action is strong enough? You need to really choose a specific action, a behavior or a behavioral action where you literally have to get off your chair and do something about it. So I would say that, okay, in terms of feeling, Singaporeans are supposed to feel confident, feel happy, feel hopeful even. Outcome, they welcome and support the Japanese rule or follow the Japanese rule. So this is a table form of how my answer will look like. This is how my answer will look like in a paragraph. Always make sure that you reword the question when you answer the source. So the question is asking, why was the cartoon published? You need to start with, this cartoon was published to, then you put in all your verb and whatever that I color coded here. Whatever that I color coded and kind of written up verb, message, context, all that, those were whatever that we have written in this box here. This is just a paragraph version of how your answer will look like. But always make sure that you start your answer with by rewording the question. So the question here is, why was the cartoon published? Make sure that you start with, this cartoon was published. Because the moment you don't do that, even if everything else in your answer is correct, you will just get 0 for it. Okay, so now let's practice with a social studies source. This is for the upper sec students. I would like to revisit the example from the Inference of Message lesson. If you remember, this was the source, a cartoon published about plans to build the Cross Island Line. This was our Inference of Message answer. So we have established that the main message of the source is that it's trying to criticize the Singapore government for the building of the Cross Island Line because it's detrimental to the CCNR, ensuring that it may stress out the flora and fauna in the nature reserve. Just a reminder, context is not so applicable in SS because all our sources in social studies are all decontextualized source. Now, using this source, I want to use it as an inference of purpose question. So just to recap, this is the difference between message and purpose. Now, the message is the same, but after you have processed the message of the source, what are you supposed to feel? What is supposed to happen next? So this is where you need to think of it for inference of purpose. So if this source is supposed to criticize the Singapore government for wanting to build the Cross Island Line because it will stress out or destroy the flora and fauna in the nature reserve, we need to ask ourselves, okay, what is the target audience, or in this case the government, is supposed to feel after they see this source? And after they react and feel accordingly to this source, what is the next course of action? What is the specific action that they are supposed to do next? Because essentially, the question is asking us, why did the cartoonist draw this cartoon? So there must be an outcome to be achieved. So I would say that, okay, if I'm criticizing the government because I think that this cross island line will kind of destroy the flora and fauna, then I would say that, okay, I guess in terms of feeling, I would want the government to reconsider the plans to build the cross island line. After reconsidering, it's not enough to just reconsider. I would want the government to stop building the cross island line, or maybe make alternative arrangement to the building of the line. So this is how my answer will look like in a paragraph. Similarly, I will revert the question for the source. So for my answer, so my question is, why did the cartoonist draw this cartoon? I will revert the question to answer my question. Revert the question to answer it. So the cartoonist draw this cartoon to criticize the Singapore government, blah blah blah. As you can see from the source, I have already color coded and marked out all my verb, my audience, message, feelings, and outcome. So this is how my answer has moved from a table version to a paragraph version. Okay, so just a quick reminder, spend 10 to 15 minutes on this question because usually inference of purpose is 5 to 6 marks. The rule of the thumb is 1 mark is 2 minutes. So ideally, you're supposed to spend a maximum of 15 minutes on this question. Please don't spend more than 10 to 15 minutes because by doing so, you are shortchanging yourself in terms of other skills. Always remember to have an outcome for your answer. Make sure that in order for your outcome to be a strong outcome, you must have feelings. Your actions must be a behavioral action, something that I can get off my chair and do something about it. And also remember, a lot of students always get confused with inference of content because they need to give 2 paragraphs of inference of content, but it's not the same. I know it's an inference, but it's not the same. For inference of purpose, just 1 paragraph of verb, audience, message, context, if relevant, feelings, and outcome. I hope this has been helpful for you. Always remember, if you are in doubt, always check in with your humanities teacher. Okay, this is the end of today's lesson. Bye bye.